At its peak, the Roman Empire stretched over 5 million square kilometers, or 1.9 million square miles, and it had an estimated population of 50 to 90 million people. Accounting for roughly 20% of the world's population at the time, the Roman Empire was undoubtedly one of the largest and most powerful to exist throughout history. With powerful leaders and an unstoppable military force, the world was truly in the palm of Rome's hand. At least, most of it was. Despite their ambitions for increasing power and wealth, there was one country that Rome could simply never conquer: Scotland. Formerly known as Caledonia, Scotland was one of the few territories that the Romans could not fully gain control over, despite several attempts at doing so. Even today, historians often debate the main question: why? Why couldn't the most powerful society of its time conquer what seems like such a small territory in comparison to what it's already taken? Today we're going to explore the most common theories and try to understand how Scotland remained resilient and independent from the mighty Roman Empire. Keep in mind that we will mostly refer to Scotland as Caledonia throughout the rest of this video for historical context, but otherwise sit back, relax and join us as we explore the reasons why Rome couldn't conquer Scotland. Welcome to the Roman Empire. Mountains and forests and bogs, oh my. So we've definitely touched on this channel before about the rigorous training and fighting that the Roman army went through to become so large and powerful. However, one thing that wasn't necessarily mentioned was that much of this action took place on the flat terrains across Europe. The strategies used by the Roman military favoured flat terrain as battlefield, most likely due to their hands-on approaches and use of cavalry. That being said, all their training and past battle experience could never truly prepare them for what they faced when they reached Caledonia. Britannia, or modern-day England and Wales, had mostly flat terrain with very little mountains, so it seemed as though the island as a whole would be an easy conquest to the Romans. However, as they advanced north into Caledonia, they quickly realized that they were met with a much different battleground. In stark contrast to Britannia, Caledonia's terrain was much more rugged, boasting tall mountains and dense bogs and lochs throughout the land. The soldiers may have been used to long marches through some mountainous terrain, but they weren't used to the wet, unstable grounds that wound through the highlands. Not to mention, there wasn't much of a clear view for the soldiers to even watch where they were going. The mountains throughout Caledonia were also covered with thick, dense forests, so the massive trees and overgrown bushes covering the landscape made navigating the paths even more difficult, especially in the dead of night. The expansive vegetation also provided another disadvantage: mist. Even today, Scotland is known for experiencing heavy rain, dangerous storms, and generally unpredictable weather year-round. And as you can imagine, the random weather patterns alone made the terrain even more difficult for the Romans to deal with, but storms were just as much of an issue for them when they were over. As the storms would pass and the sun would heat up the land, the moisture from the forests and thick grasslands would produce dense fog and mist throughout the land, to the point where they would create natural smoke screens. To make matters worse, the rain is usually harshest during the cold months of autumn and winter, so it's safe to say that many Roman soldiers probably succumbed to the environment alone. Nevertheless, the Roman forces attempted to press on, and eventually they came face to face with the next factor in their defeat: the people of Caledonia. The Romans meet their match. For the most part, the people of ancient Caledonia are a mystery. Commonly known today as Picts, their name is derived from the Latin word picti, which means painted people. To this day, we don't know what they referred to themselves as, but we do know that the Romans referred to them as Picti due to their ornate tattoos that covered their bodies from head to toe. The Picts did not keep written records of their own, but much of their history is preserved through beautiful, complex artwork consisting of various symbols that decorate or form larger images. However, it is worth noting that the Picts didn't necessarily make up a single culture or unit of people. Rather, the Picts were generally referred to as a confederation of tribal units throughout Caledonia. That being said, there wasn't much of a political system that united the people of Caledonia as a whole, and to the Romans this made them an easy target for conquest. The Romans were built on the ideas of structure and discipline, so in their eyes the absence of these principles meant that the Picts would be unprepared and easy to defeat. However, it didn't take long for them to realize that they severely underestimated their opponents. The Picts ultimately became one of Rome's most formidable opponents in history. Part of what led to their great success is what partially led to Rome's failure: the landscape. The Romans weren't used to the harsh landscape of Caledonia, but the Picts were, and they knew how to use it to their advantage. Based on what historians have been able to uncover from Roman accounts, the Picts were mostly known for guerrilla warfare tactics, often rushing the soldiers from behind the trees and blind spots throughout the mountains. Most historians agree that their overall favourite tactic was an attack and run strategy. Small groups would suddenly ambush the Roman camps and quickly retreat into the woods, luring the soldiers out and coaxing them to go after the Picts. Once in more favourable territory, a larger group would be hiding and waiting for the soldiers, who would rush them and attack them with full force, nearly wiping out the entire unit in a single skirmish. Like with many of their adversaries, the Romans tried to slow down the Picts and force them into surrender by cutting off their supply lines. While this may have worked temporarily in some areas, it didn't deter the Picts as a whole, and they continued to fight even when the odds seemed against them. The tenacious resilience of the Picts and their aggressive fighting style ultimately shed light on yet another issue the Romans faced during the conquest of Caledonia. Was it really worth it? The most prominent theory as to why Rome couldn't conquer Caledonia lies within the point of conquest itself: money. Like any other empire, Rome's primary reason for expansion was controlling the land for its resources, especially rich minerals and metals such as salt, silver, and gold. While Caledonia did harbour some of these precious materials, the harsh landscape once again made things difficult, as mining these resources was no easy task. Subsequently, the trade routes that the soldiers would have taken to deliver anything back to the cities would have been risky, if not deadly, in most cases. This, combined with having to replenish whatever was lost during the unpredictable battles with the Picts, had to have ultimately made the Romans wonder if it was all really worth it. Caledonia may have been rich in materials, but it ultimately got to a point where the money that was spent supporting the fight started to outweigh the potential benefits of the conquest. To put it into perspective, in roughly 122 AD, the infamous Hadrian's Wall was constructed as the original border between the already conquered Britannia and Caledonia. According to the biographical collection Historia Augusta, his primary purpose for constructing this wall was to separate the barbarians from the Romans. Roughly 26 years following Hadrian's death, his successor, Antonius Pius, abandoned Hadrian's Wall and ordered a new wall to be built 100 miles north, known today as the Antonine Wall. However, the soldiers only made use of the Antonine Wall for about 20 years before that one was ultimately abandoned in favour of returning to use Hadrian's Wall instead. Shortly thereafter, in roughly 180 AD, the Picts stormed the wall during a major battle, and although there aren't many details on the fight itself, it is speculated that this battle led to even further changes and fortifications to the wall in the early 3rd century AD. That being said, the amount of monetary and human resources that went into maintaining this wall alone must have been extremely high, and considering the Picts were nowhere near ready to give up, it's easy to see how the war over Caledonia would have become too expensive to continue. In 211 AD, shortly after the Picts stormed Hadrian's Wall, the emperor at the time, Septimus Severus, died of illness, and the desire to conquer Caledonia had ceased. Many historians believe that the Emperor Severus was the last Roman emperor who was truly passionate about the idea of conquering Caledonia, which is ultimately why the Romans never made any further attempts following his death. But as you can see based on what we've discussed thus far, there may be somewhat more than meets the eye. The consensus? The overall historical consensus as to why the Romans couldn't conquer Scotland is still very much up for debate. Many of them seem to lean towards the financial aspect, but at the end of the day there are a multitude of possible reasons as to why they couldn't succeed in this particular conquest. I think it's safe to say that there isn't really one particular reason as to why, but rather every factor we discussed played an equal part in creating a domino effect set up for failure. Between the harsh landscapes, the tenacious natives, and the drawn-out expenses, it's safe to say that in many aspects the attempts to conquer Caledonia truly weren't worth the resources or the risk. But of course, we'd love to hear your theories down below. Do you believe in one theory more than another, or do you believe they all played an equal part in Rome's defeat? Well, while we couldn't give you a definitive answer to today's question, we still hope you enjoyed the video and learned something exciting. We may never truly know exactly why Rome gave up on its conquest for Scotland, but one thing we do know is that Scotland has proved its resilience since its earliest beginnings, and they will always go down in history as one of Rome's most formidable opponents. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Roman Empire. Please do subscribe if you enjoyed this video, as we do release a new one every Friday. Thanks so much everyone, hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!